Hello everybody, I'm Kion Basics, and in this video I'd like to talk to you about 3K karate, specifically the term 3K karate. So within our community, within the practical karate community, we often use the term 3K karate to refer to the less functional ways of approaching karate. Now, as far as I'm aware, that term 3K karate is one that I coined. I can't say that I've ever seen anyone use it prior to me. So I'd like to explain what I mean by it, because it confuses people a little bit, because, I mean, all approaches to karate, practical and impractical, have the 3Ks. You know, they do the kata, the kion, and the kumite. Kata, of course, being the forms, the kion being the basics, you know, learning good, solid, basic technique, and the kumite being the sparring. Now, all of those things are important in a traditional approach. But what makes 3K karate unique, it's the way that they approach the kata, the kion, and the kumite, and the fact that the three are practiced as entirely separate disciplines. They're not practiced as an holistic whole, okay? So when I define 3K karate, I always say kata, kion, and kumite, and never the three shall meet. And that's the key bit, okay? It's not just the fact that they've got kata, kion, and kumite in them, it's the way that every single one of them is practiced separately. So I'd like to discuss each one of these in turn. So the first K is kion, basics, line work. In the 3K approach, this is often overemphasized. We shouldn't be spending most of our training time punching the air. There is definitely a place for kion. There is definitely a place for isolating motions and working on that motion. But again, it should be part of a whole. It shouldn't be an end in itself. Now, because it's an end in itself in the 3K approach, as I mentioned, they tend to spend far too long on it. And often the motions used in the kion are impractical motions, especially when you see the combinations. So these weird and wonderful combinations, naifan, nukate, maegeri, agyuki, sotoki, gidambra, all these weird movements just stuck end to end that make little sense combatively. What will happen in the practical approach is we still drill the motion, but we'll also take those motions into partner drills and pad drills. We're developing them as we do it, and all of the motions have a objective, real-world combative function. So there's the big difference. Kion is done in both practices, but in the 3K approach, kion is done fundamentally to get good at kion, where good is defined arbitrarily. Whereas in the practical approach, kion is done with a view to developing combative functional skill as part of a wider whole, and there's an objective measure with that. So the next K we've got is kata, and this is obviously a big one. In the 3K approach, kata is done to get good at kata. That's it. And good is defined as being close, or as close as possible, to what our style says it should be, or the head of our style says it should be. You know, there's like an arbitrary dictate. You know, we do it correctly, but the style down the road has the hand in an inch different position, and therefore they're blasphemers and everything they do is wrong. Right, so they do kata to get good at kata, and good is an arbitrary thing, something someone's just plucked out of the air. With the practical approach, we do kata as part of a process. We do it with an aim to make us more combatively efficient. The kata itself is just a step along the way, it's not the aim. And we also define good, again, as combative efficiency, so it's an objective measure, not a subjective one. So to quickly define that process, when we do kata, when practical karate could do kata, we do the solo form, and we make the solo form as good and as strong as we can be. We learn the body dynamics and everything else, but we're doing so with a view to make it combatively functional. And we also practice those combative functions with a partner, not as arbitrary karate versus karateka choreographed battles with people attacking along the compass points and all that kind of stuff. We don't do that. We take the kata and we practice applying it in close range in very realistic ways that would work in a self-defense scenario. We also realize that that's just an example of concept. So we look at the principles at play and say, okay, what are the combative principles at play here? And then analysing them, we give them free rein. We look at other ways in which they can be applied and adapted. We look at ways in which we can fight in accordance with them no matter what the ever-changing situation can be. And we also practice that in our live drills, in our kumite, which we'll come to in a moment. So again, these are the significant differences. A 3K practitioner does kata to get good at kata, and good is an arbitrary thing. So it's entirely subjective. However, the practical karateka does kata as the means of a process to become combatively more efficient. And there we have an objective measure. So the final one is kumite, or sparring, and there's a big difference here. In the 3K approach, again, sparring is its own separate discipline. Kumite, the form of kumite practice, has very little relevance to the traditional kata, and hence the old style art, the original karate, if you like. And the way that the techniques that they use in the kumite are entirely different normally from the techniques that they use in the kion and the kata. It's a separate discipline again. Even in the schools that don't compete, the sparring tends to be competitively based. It tends to be of that format. So you've got two karateka who agree to fight, they're 10 feet away, they're bounced up and down with the guards up, they move in, score a point, move back out, and then, okay, I got that one and let's play again. Nothing wrong with that. If your objective is to win in sports karate, that's the way you should be sparring. It's not the traditional way of sparring. It's not the way the old masters thought about sparring, and it has no relevance to kata, has no relevance to self-defense, but there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. It's a fine thing to do. If you like competition karate, more power to you. If you're wanting to do a more practical and from a self-defense perspective, an older, more true version of the art, then your sparring will be different. So in the practical approach, the kumite is not separate. It flows from the kion that we've done, the kata that we've done, and the bunkai drills that we find there. So we will allow clinching, headbutting, grabbing, gouging, throwing, choking, strangling, groundwork, protecting other people, the use of weapons, escaping. All of these things will be part of the live drills that we do. It's not a separate discipline. It flows out of the two-person drills, because the objective of the old style kata was self-defense techniques, not a consensual fight against another martial artist. It's a non-consensual violence of the criminal that we're looking to deal with. And so the sparring will reflect that. It will include dialogue. It will include protecting other people. It will include escaping. It's not limited by rules. So if we're doing throws as part of our bunkai work, then those throws should be there in our sparring. This doesn't mean that there's, which often confuses people, there's not just one type of sparring. In the pragmatic approach, the holistic approach, we have lots of different types, depending on what skill we're wishing to develop. So we'll have drills where, okay, I've got to protect this person and you three have got to get to them. We'll have drills where we say, okay, you and I are going to throw one another, or you're going to try and throw me and I'm going to try and break away from you. We've got lots and lots of different drills depending on the skills that we're trying to develop. Probably more than we can discuss here, but that's the big difference. In the 3K approach, kumite is its own separate discipline, and often it's, even those that don't compete, it's done in the competitive way. However, for the holistic guys, for the practical guys, their sparring flows out of their approach to the bunkai and the kata. And if you look traditionally at this, that's the way it was supposed to be. Gichin Funakoshi, the founder of Shotokan, regarded as the father of modern karate, said, sparring does not exist apart from the kata, but for the practice of the kata. You can see that in the holistic approaches, the practical approaches. You don't see it in the 3K approaches. We have Chojimagi, the founder of Goju-ryu. We go through kumite, we will realize the practical meanings of kata. So again, we see that there. Motobu said that kumite is live drills where we use the techniques of the kata to grapple with an opponent. So there's many more besides. So, but if you look at how the old masters viewed kumite, you can see that in the pragmatic approach. However, in the 3K approach, which is ironically often regarded as being the most traditional, it's not, because the kata has been separated from the kumite and we do sports style kumite. It's new, it's not traditional. So again, we have a difference between the way they're approached, and the big difference once again is that in a practical approach there is a fundamental objective measure of skill and it all integrates together. Whereas in the 3K approach, it's arbitrary. They've just chosen the rules of competition karate. Let's spar that way. And they're all separate. Okay, the kion and the kata and the kumite are all practiced as separate disciplines. So to conclude, I'd just like to make it clear that I don't see anything wrong with 3K karate. If it's done for health purposes, enjoyment purposes, the culture of it, that's fine. But the instant you say, okay, this is practical, well, practical has objective measures, right? And unfortunately, the 3K approach doesn't cut it. Right? The kata is done to get good at kata. They don't explore the bunkai. They miss 99% of what karate has to offer, and they've no effective way of training that stuff. Just going through the kata will not develop combative skill if it's not part of a wider process. The kion is done to get good at kion. Again, there's no objective measure with that. It tends not to progress into anything else. And then we've got the kumite, which tends to be sports sparring based. Not that there's anything wrong with that in itself, but again, it's not the most efficient way to train if your stated objective is self-defense based skills. If you're looking at the practical approach to it, then the kihon, the kata and the kumite all mixed together along with the pad work and everything else. It's an holistic whole. The techniques of the kihon are direct and functional, and we're measuring by combative effect. In the kata, we explore the kata, we take the bunkai drills away from that, we drill those with the partner, we learn the locking, the choking, the throwing, the trapping, all of that good fun stuff. And then what we also do in the kumite is we design drills that have relevance to the way things work in self-defense. We practice it in a live, free-flowing way, making use of the things that we find from the traditional kata. So the practical approach is undoubtedly the most traditional approach. You know, traditional means adhering to a long-established procedure. And the way a 3K is new, it's a relatively new experiment. We're talking from the 1940s onwards, whereas the more holistic approach has been around for a lot longer. So I'm not having a go at 3K karate, but we need to be objective here and acknowledge that if our aim is combative functional skill, then we need to approach karate as the old masters approached it. And that's in a more holistic way where everything supports everything else and everything is done with a view to developing combative skill. There's no doing kata just to get good at kata, kion to get good at kion, and then just arbitrarily picking a form of sparring and saying that's the way we spar. You need to say, what skills do I want to develop from my sparring? And if it's self-defense based skills, then you need to recreate self-defense in your sparring. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and agree or disagree, I hope it's given you some food for thought. So thanks very much for your support. Take care now. Bye-bye.